Good afternoon. The first item of business is portfolio questions. The first portfolio is Justice and Law Officers. It's question 1, which is Jackie Bailey, please. Miss Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Crown Office will release its findings from the investigation into the fatal fire at Cameron House in December 2017.
Lord Advocate.
This is a live investigation which is continuing under the direction of a Senior Advocate Depute. Like other incidents of this sort, it involves technical issues which require input from relevant experts. A decision as to whether or not there should be a prosecution can be made only once final reports have been submitted to the Crown by Police Scotland and other regulatory and investigating agencies. Upon receipt, those reports will be considered fully and carefully by prosecutors. That stage has not yet been reached. The Crown continues to keep the families of the deceased updated.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the Lord Advocate for his response, but I'm sure he will appreciate it has been almost 2 years since the fire at Cameron House, which claimed the lives of Simon Midgley and Richard Dyson. The families have been patient, and of course we want to give you sufficient time to investigate, but could you give us any indication of when you are likely to arrive at a conclusion?
Lord Advocate.
I appreciate the impact that the passage of time in relation to investigations, both criminal investigations and death investigations, have on those involved, and particularly bereaved families. The member will appreciate that it is essential that the criminal investigative process be allowed to take its course. A decision will be made just as soon as it is possible to do so.
Question 2, Margaret Mitchell.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to support police in tackling drug use at football grounds.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Yousaf.
The Scottish Government has invested $800 million to tackle the problem of alcohol and drug use since 2008. A programme for government, as the member will be aware, announced last week, commits a further £20 million over the next 2 years to support local services, provide targeted support and raise awareness of the dangers of drug use. Police Scotland will continue to work with football clubs to investigate any drug misuse at matches, and is also committed to including ensuring people involved in drug dealing and distribution are very effectively targeted for arrest and prosecution. We want Scotland's football grounds to be welcoming places for everybody, including families and children. The Scottish Government is working with the football authorities, clubs and other partners to address some of the negative issues we've seen in recent months, including reported drug misuse. We fully support clubs in their efforts to deal with any such behaviour which is illegal and contravenes the grounds regulations. The use of sniffer dogs by Hibs is just one example of the positive action clubs can take to deter illegal activity and unacceptable conduct. While the allocation of prioritisation of resources is obviously a matter for the Chief Constable, the Scottish Government's funding for policing 2019-20 has increased by £42.3 million.
I don't want to sort of interfere too much with Cabinet Secretary's position, but if you could have slightly shorter answers, we'll make greater progress through the questions, because I'm very hard on members. Margaret Mitchell.
Yeah. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but you will be aware that this is a growing problem, and recent reports of cocaine drug use have been highlighted in Hamilton, Easter Road, Pittodrie, Celtic and Ibrox. Given that we know that drug use and drug taking is an aggravating, likely to increase hooliganism and antisocial behaviour at football games, can he release some more details about the talks he's had with clubs and the effort that is going in to identify, reduce and deter fans from using drugs? Because the
please, that's
the evidence
sufficient.
of cocaine is clearly
your question's
there,
been asked.
and also
Thank
about extra.
I do want to get
intense
members, Ms Mitchell, I do want to get members in.
sniffer dog
Cabinet
use.
Secretary.
I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm happy to have a conversation with Margaret Mitchell. Of the clubs she's talked about, I've met a number of them, Aberdeen, Celtic, Hibs. Really only this issue has been raised with me by Celtic and Hibs, and I know some of the proactive measures both clubs are taking. I'm continuing conversations with the clubs, so I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Margaret Mitchell, or write to her if she feels appropriate, about how those conversations are going. I just point to one quote from John Mackenzie, head of police, what was known as the Focus Unit. He said, "We do not have any analytical evidence that demonstrates a link between football disorder and the misuse of drugs, but Police Scotland works closely with supporters groups and clubs to tackle any issues. So on that note, as I say, I'm more than happy to furnish Margaret Mitchell with further details.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Ian Gray. Beg your pardon, I had indicated to Kenneth Gibson. It has to be brief, please. Supplementary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that alcohol still remains the drug of greatest concern at football matches, and what is his view as to whether or not alcohol should be available under certain restrictions at Euro 2020?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not convinced by the argument that alcohol should be available at football grounds as things stand, and I've been having detailed discussions with a number of stakeholders around some of the unacceptable conduct that we've seen at football, and I'm not convinced, again, that introducing alcohol into the mix, even under some very restricted circumstances, beyond what is currently available at grounds, is a good idea.
Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will ensure the restoration of the through care service for people leaving prison.
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Ian Gray for a really important question. The decision by the SPS to temporarily suspend their through care support service, of course, is an operational matter and rightly a decision for SPS to make. But as SPS have made it clear, this is not a decision that anybody has taken lightly. It's a decision that's taken very reluctantly. And only done so because these experienced officers are required for duties within prison because of, unfortunately, the high prison population that we currently see. It should be said that they indicated this service has been suspended, not stopped. In the meantime, other work will continue with the prison service to help individuals prepare for the release, such as the work of personal officers, prison link centres and individual case management activity. There is, of course, other through care support that the government funds, so we provide substantial funding to the third sector, investing £3.4 million in namely the SHINE programme and the New Routes programme. These services have built an excellent track record. My officials and myself, I'm in discussions with the leaders of these third sector organisations with SPS, and we're going to consider how the third sector might be able to come in to temporarily support the work that's been left by SPS making this decision for understandable but very difficult reasons, and I hope to be able to update Ian Gray and other members in the relatively near future on how that work will progress.
Ian Gray.
Well, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply, but it's not really good enough to say that this is an operational decision for SPS. The creation of through care services was very much a policy decision driven by ministers in the past. I appreciate that our prisons are currently operating at around 5% over capacity, and that is the reason that SPS have given for bringing these officers back in to the prisons. But given the importance of through care in reducing reoffending rates, will the Cabinet Secretary not agree that SPS is cutting off its nose to spite his face here, and he should get them to change their mind?
Cabinet Secretary, I'm sorry, but briefly,
Look, I appreciate the question, and I don't disagree with his premise that, of course, through care support workers do an excellent job, and through their work they can reduce reoffending. So I don't disagree with him on that sentiment. Where I would slightly disagree with him is that, of course, if I was to overturn an operational decision by SPS, he and other opposition members would often be the first ones that would drag me here to say that I was interfering. So I need to be careful to give the Chief Executive the right operational space. That is not an excuse. I think I've also highlighted in my answer that my government officials are working with SPS and third sector leaders to develop a proposal where the third sector might be able to come in to provide that through care support by expanding the New Routes programme, for example, expanding the SHINE programme to be able to fill that gap that's been left. And I will update Ian Gray and other members who may ask questions on this and hopefully with a positive development in the not too distant future.
Liam MacArthur and then followed by Liam Kerr. Both briefly, please.
Thank you very much. As the Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged, the through care has been suspended as a result of the rising prison population. Instead of expanding this progressive service, key to rehabilitation, the Cabinet Secretary has now presided over its suspension. What are the current projections for the prison population over the next 12 months? And assuming an increase, what realistic prospect is there of through care being reinstated in the near future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as a temporary suspension, as I've said, my hope would be that the presumption against short sentence, which I know Liam MacArthur and his party supported, will see a reduction in the number of prisoners. And that reduction may be relatively small, but a reduction nonetheless. But also through some of the other measures that we will look to bring forward. So, for example, as he knows, there will be a revision to the guidance around HDC as well. And there's been an understanding with the Justice Committee, I know which Liam MacArthur sits, that perhaps the pendulum has swung slightly too far in the other direction around HDC. So there are a couple of measures that I think will help to reduce the prison population, but frankly speaking, that progressive agenda that we're bringing forward is going to have to be supported by this Parliament if we want to make substantial dent in our prison population. So my confidence is that the suspension of the through care support will be temporary, but notwithstanding that, as I said in my answer to Ian Gray, even with a temporary suspension, we're quite keen to work with third sector and other partners to see how that gap may be able to be filled.
Liam Kerr.
Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, I think we'd all agree it's vital that offenders are helped to get themselves free of illegal substances before leaving prison. But the latest figures show 26% of those leaving prison test positive for illegal drugs, which is up from 17% in 2009. Is the Scottish Government doing any analysis to find out why attempts to keep drugs out of prisons appear to be failing?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I'm happy for Liam Kerr to be put in touch with SPS and those that are dealing with this on the ground, but I think he'll probably be aware of the fact that in the last few years, certainly the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a huge spike in psychoactive substances, namely spice, but psychoactive substances entering into our prisons. The difficulty around psychoactive substances is their difficulty to detect. And therefore, there's a number of various solutions to that are being tested at the moment in the prison estate. For example, rapid scan machines and others. So we're at the stage of that equipment being piloted. I'm waiting for an evaluation to come back from SPS, and if there are, for example, capital funding requirements around that, then it's clearly an issue that government will have to look at very, very closely. But if Liam Kerr wants to follow that up with the prison service, I'm more than happy to facilitate those discussions.
Thank you. Question 4, Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the contact assessment model pilot.
Cabinet Secretary.
CAM is the new operating model for police call handling being introduced by Police Scotland. It's being introduced to enable Police Scotland to respond more effectively to vulnerability and demand, utilising a very robust approach to assessment of risk and vulnerability. Phase 1 implementation of CAM progressed on the 12th of June in Lanarkshire and in Dumfries and Galloway. Police Scotland and the SPA indicate that Phase 1 implementation is proceeding positively. It's delivering benefits in terms of improved assessment of risk and service delivery. The SPA and Police Scotland intend to proceed with Phase 2 from late autumn this year. This will see the new model rolled out to Greater Glasgow. Implementation of CAM is overseen by the CAM Oversight Group, which is chaired by the SPA.
Jenny Gilruth.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. During recess, I was grateful to have the opportunity to learn more about the CAM pilot along with my colleague Rona Mackay at the Contact Command and Control Centre in Govan. And given that the CAM pilot had a 99% compliance rate, can the Cabinet Secretary provide more detail regarding when he expects the model to be rolled out nationally?
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, she'll forgive me because clearly there's operational decisions around when that should be rolled out nationally. I'm delighted she came to my constituency in Govan and saw the CAM, the contact assessment model up close. I can confirm though, although the timing is a matter for Police Scotland, I can confirm that Police Scotland do intend to roll out CAM nationally. As I say, timescales for this are subject to all phases of implementation being completed successfully in accordance with the relevant assurance processes, and of course monitoring and evaluation each phase to ensure, of course, that there are no unintended consequences to what I think is a very good model. So, of course, Jenny Gilruth can contact Police Scotland directly. They'll be able to give us some more detail about the phasing, but I can confirm that there will be a national rollout of CAM.
James Kelly, briefly.
Given that adequate police resources are important for successful implementation of the contact assessment model, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he's concerned about the comments of Deputy Chief Constable Will Kerr that the current budget has a potential shortfall in police numbers of 700, and if that is the case, the consequence for resource and CAM and adequate police cover in local communities is quite severe.
Cabinet Secretary.
What I would say to James Kelly, let me welcome him to his first Justice Portfolio questions, is I always take seriously what the police have to say to me, particularly somebody of the seniority of DCC Will Kerr. What I would say is that from when this government first came in 2007 to now, we have over 1,000 extra additional police officers. That's in sharp contrast to the picture in England and Wales. So we're continuing to invest in our police. We're continuing to increase the police numbers. What I would say is that the agreement with Police Scotland is that numbers can only ever be reduced if there is enhanced operational capability that is demonstrated, and that's overseen by HMICS. So therefore, if that can't be done, then there's a conversation to have with government. One is exactly as James Kelly is suggesting. SPA will rightly, as they undoubtedly will do with any government, request additional funds, or there has to be a deficit revision of the deficit reduction plan. So at the moment, we'll continue to engage positively with Police Scotland. I won't prejudge the spending review later this year. The important point, though, is of course, we have more police officers now than when we inherited power over 12 years ago.
Question 5, Ruth Maguire.
To ask the Scottish Government how the Justice Secretary's priorities in Equally Safe strategy will be supported by its programme for government.
Cabinet Secretary.
This year's PFG clearly sets out the Scottish Government's ongoing commitment to prevent and eradicate gender-based violence. Each action for the year ahead is aligned against one of their 4 priorities set out within the Equally Safe strategy. That includes actions to ensure that men desist from all forms of violence against women and girls. This year, the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018 came into effect, and we will continue to support the implementation of this landmark legislation by engaging with those who work in housing, social work, health and schools to ensure that professionals have resources available to them to support a shared understanding of domestic abuse. Later this year, we'll introduce a Forensic Medical Services Victims of Sexual Offences Bill to promote early and consistent access to healthcare for victims of sexual assault. And we will support a pilot to visually record rape complainer statements to police to be used as evidence later in a trial to reduce the need for them to recount their ordeal again in court.
Ruth Maguire.
I appreciate that answer. Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned the Equally Safe Priority 4, that men desist from all forms of violence against women and girls, and perpetrators of such violence receive robust and effective responses. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government intends to tackle human trafficking?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Ruth Maguire for an exceptionally important question. I should have paid credit to her in terms of the work that she's done to promote Equally Safe in this Parliament. Any form of human trafficking and exploitation, including sexual exploitation, is completely unacceptable in 21st century Scotland. I've been hugely impressed by working with not just my officials, but of course the stakeholders involved in this work in terms of their commitment to eradicate human trafficking. There are still huge problems in and around human trafficking, not just in the UK, but indeed here in Scotland. That is evidenced by the referrals that come into the national referral mechanism. We know people are trafficked for a range of reasons. Labour exploitation for male victims has increased in recent years, but as Ruth Maguire suggests, we have to recognise the impact of trafficking for sexual exploitation can be particularly devastating. So we have a strategy. We are progressing some elements of the legislation which have not been progressed. We'll continue to support specialist funds, specialist support such as TARA, Migrant Help. But of course, if the member wishes a fuller answer on all the actions that we're progressing, then of course I'd be happy to write to the member.
Question 6, Lewis MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government in what circumstances the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Gold Commanders are deployed.
Minister Ashton.
Operational decisions, including the deployment of Gold Commanders, are a matter for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Gold Commanders are deployed in a broad range of circumstances, such as all Level 5 incident types, spate conditions in a region or regions, large-scale incidents, serious incidents, and also major incidents.
Lewis, I'd like to call you first, Mr MacDonald. I know you're dead keen. We want to save time, but Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you very much. Does the Minister accept that current procedures mean that in the event of such a serious incident at St Fergus or on Royal Deeside or in Aberdeen, the Gold Commander in charge would be deployed no further north than Dundee? And if she does acknowledge that fact, would she agree that it is time for the centralisation of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to be brought to an end? Minister,
briefly please.
I thank the member for that question, and of course it is imperative that we have the right level of leadership for these type of major and large-scale incidents in place at the right time. So SFRS are constantly reviewing and planning the resource that's required for delivery of frontline services, and that of course would include also succession planning for senior leadership and so on. Gold Command officers have been mobilised approximately 14 times over the past 2 years,
And I would like to reassure the member that there has never been a single occasion where SFRS have not responded with the required resources. But I will follow up with the member with more detail on the specific point that he raised.
Thank you. I'm afraid that has to conclude the first session of portfolio questions. I apologise to Maureen Watt. Despite my best efforts, Ms Watt, we failed to reach you. And we're going to move on to the second set in just a moment when the front benches change places. The second portfolio set of questions is on government business and constitutional relations. Can I remind members that questions 1 and 3 are grouped. Any member who wishes to ask a supplementary on either of these questions should press the request to speak buttons in the usual way. And I'll take these after I've taken questions and supplementaries from the members whose questions have been grouped. As usual, try to make your questions short, and can I beg ministers, I know it's difficult and I understand why, but to try and let everyone get in with their questions, you should be helpful too. Question 1, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how to ensure that it considers and takes actions on the recommendations made by the Citizens' Assembly of Scotland when it concludes its deliberations in April 2020.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
All recommendations made by the Citizens' Assembly of Scotland will be debated in this Parliament. Where the Parliament agrees with these recommendations, the Scottish Government will set out a plan for implementing the Parliament's decisions. That plan will be published by the Government within 3 months of the Assembly's recommendations having been received.
David Torrance.
I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary shares my observations of a stark contrast that exists now in the UK between the Scottish Government that is actively listening and acting upon the views of its citizens and the UK Government that is denying the people a voice by shutting down Parliament and preventing those elected the right to hold the Government to account.
Cabinet Secretary.
This afternoon, I think, will provide that contrast. We will be debating the Citizens' Assembly, I hope, in a constructive and consensual way, at the same time as the judges in the Inner House have indicated that the prorogation is illegal. And in those circumstances, what should be happening to parallel our positive step is that Westminster Parliament should immediately be recalled and the prorogation cancelled.
Question 3, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government what measures it is taking to ensure the impartiality of its planned Citizens' Assembly.
Cabinet Secretary.
I will be addressing this issue this afternoon in the debate that is to come, but can I just say that the Assembly is already led by 2 independent conveners, one of whom is a third sector leader, one of whom was a Scottish Labour member of the European Parliament for 35 years. The members of the Assembly will be selected in a scientific process that broadly represents the Scottish adult, that is 16+ population, taking into account a range of factors: geography, age, gender, ethnic group, educational qualifications, limiting long-term conditions, disability, attitudes towards independence, the UK's membership of the EU, Scottish Parliament voting preferences. And the contract for the recruitment of those members under that basis was awarded following a competitive procurement process.
Liz Smith.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary, and he said when he introduced the idea of the Citizens' Assembly that they would be transparent, inclusive and independent. But his colleague Joanna Cherry MP said that the Assemblies would, and I quote, be the perfect way to move Scotland towards independence. Cabinet Secretary, these 2 things do not sit together. Can I ask you which is correct?
Well,
Cabinet Secretary.
I am responsible in the Scottish Government for the establishment of the Citizens' Assembly. I have indicated to you what the position is of the Scottish Government on this matter. I know the member is addressing me as a Minister of the Scottish Government. I hope she will take my assurance as the person involved in this. I am determined to make sure this is an independent body, and I have taken many steps to do so, more of which I shall outline this afternoon. This will be a totally, fully independent body, which will set its own terms, which will choose the way in which it operates, and will report in a fully independent way. The member and I know each other for many years. I hope she will accept my assurances on that matter.
Question 2, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress is, what progress it has made on fully implementing the recommendations in the Scottish Information Commissioner's intervention report on its FOI practice and performance.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, the Commissioner published his annual progress report on the Scottish Government's implementation of the Action Plan on the 29th of July. In it, he outlines the significant progress made across each recommendation and confirms he anticipates the Government will complete implementation by the end of the current calendar year.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you. And just to confirm then, Minister, are you comfortable the Government will complete the action plan by the end of this year?
Presiding Officer, a great deal of time and effort has gone in not only to improve performance but also to embed change. So the answer in short is yes, I am.
I like to hear answers in short. Question 4, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its anticipated timescale is for the progress of a Scottish Elections Reform Bill.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Elections Reform Bill was introduced to Parliament on the 2nd of September 2019. The Bill's timetable thereafter, of course, is a matter for the Parliamentary Bureau.
Alexander Burnett.
Can I thank you for his answer there? This Parliament's Finance and Constitution Committee, of which I'm a member, is presently dealing with the Referendums Bill and will likely have to deal with the franchise and electoral reform bills as well. So has the Scottish Government seriously considered how all three of these will be passed at least 6 months before the next scheduled Scottish Parliament election, taking into account the Gould principle?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, with the greatest respect to the member, I think he presumes something there. It's a matter for the Bureau to allocate any bill to whatever committee it's relevant to do so. But what I would do is give him an assurance that as a Minister for Parliamentary Business, one of the considerations I always have in bringing forward legislation is the workload of committees and to ensure they have sufficient time in order to interrogate any bills that are brought forward. And sitting next to him is Mr Mountain, who I'm sure would concur that when a committee such as his has requested additional time to allow them to carry out the work, I've been receptive to that.
Question 5, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the impact on Scotland of constitutional developments in the House of Commons.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, no one should underestimate the significance of events at Westminster. By his prorogation, the Prime Minister used a prerogative power to remove from MPs a decision on how many days the Commons would sit before the 31st of October. The prorogation of over 30 days is significantly longer than any prorogation in modern times, and the Court's decision today in Scotland reflects upon that. The Prime Minister took these steps preemptively before the Commons had returned from recess, presenting MPs with a fait accompli. All of these factors, the use of executive powers to deny MPs a voice, the discarding of recent commonly accepted practice, the denial of any opportunity to challenge or scrutinise government action, should give all of us grave cause for concern. It is no surprise that these actions of the Prime Minister galvanised opposition in the Commons to come together to prevent a no-deal Brexit, actions with which the Scottish Government completely agrees.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary. In a week of astonishing constitutional events, none can top the Court of Session's ruling this morning that the Prime Minister acted unlawfully in proroguing the UK Parliament. The Court said, I quote, "It was motivated by the improper purpose of stymieing Parliament." Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that Downing Street sources would be advised now to spend more time preparing for the recall of Parliament and less time making outrageous remarks about Scotland's judges and judicial system?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, and I have to say, and I do this speculatively, but I think he is agreeing with me. I know that, for example, Mr Tompkins has indicated his disagreement with, well, he uses the word outrageous, and I would, for once, agree with him completely. The Downing Street remarks, in which sources in number 10 suggested the legal activists chose the Scottish courts for a reason, is an outrageous thing to say. Gavin Barwell, I think now Lord Barwell, Theresa May's Chief of Staff, said this is an unwise road for a party that believes in the Union and the rule of law to go down. And Robert Buckland, the UK Justice Secretary, eventually tweeted, "Our judges are renowned around the world for their excellence and impartiality. I have total confidence in their independence in every case." The member is right. The right reaction to this is to recall Parliament. If I may use a song title from the estimable band Pete and Diesel from the member's own constituency, that this may be the way the Tories do it, but it's not the way we do it in Scotland, let alone the Western Isles.
Question 6, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last spoke to the UK Government regarding intergovernmental relations.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, this morning is the answer to the question that has been asked. I met Oliver Dowden, the Paymaster General and Minister for the Cabinet Office. The last ministerial meeting to take place was the quadrilateral with the Finance Ministers on the 29th of August. My colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Economy and Fair Work, discussed the governance in terms of reference for that forum with UK and Welsh Government ministers. The last ministerial discussion where the ongoing quadrilateral review of intergovernmental relations was on the agenda was a JMC-EN on the 28th of June. There is a meeting of the JMC-EN tomorrow, and the new Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union will co-chair that meeting.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. And does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the intergovernmental relations with the UK Government is broken and that the attempts to formalise a respect agenda are continually rebuked by a disrespected UK Government? And clearly the best way to have a respect agenda would be for Scotland to become an independent nation and to formalise relations as equals.
I could not disagree with a single word of that, but I also think it is important for the UK Government, even in its present confused state, to recognise that the procedures and relationships are not simply in the gift of the UK Government. I had occasion to say to the Paymaster General this morning that whilst they may wish to change the ways in which the intergovernmental review is discussed, for example by doing it by trilateral rather than through the JMC-EN, that is a matter for all the participants, not just for one participant. I think he took the point, but it is an important point and has been emphasised by Mark Drakeford as well. The JMC process does not belong to the UK Government, and the more it behaves as if it does, the harder it will be to make any progress.
Question 7, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what advice it has received on the effect that the legal date of the UK's exit from the EU will have on its continuity bill.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as members are aware, the Scottish Ministerial Code states that ministers must not ordinarily divulge either the source or content of legal advice. Legal advice is confidential. It's a very long-established convention that legal advice provided to the Scottish Government is not published, and the Government does not disclose the source of advice. On the issue of the question, apart from legal advice, the Scottish Government is determined to respect the choices this Parliament made when passing the Continuity Bill to the maximum extent possible. Therefore, the new bill will bring back provisions to ensure Scots law may continue to keep pace with EU law, as we believe that the extent to which devolved law aligns itself with the law of the EU should be a decision for this Parliament to take, not the UK Government. The bill is also intended to maintain the role of environmental principles and effective and proportionate environmental governance after EU exit.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer? The Supreme Court ruled that the SNP's previous bill was largely incompetent, and the independent judiciary, which we all support in this chamber, made the decision that the SNP had refused to accept this. When the new bill is introduced, will it meet the criteria set out by the court?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would advise the member to go and read the judgment. I don't understand where his interpretation comes from. The Supreme Court judgment was very clear, with one very small exception, The reality in terms of this bill, the Continuity Bill, was that it was competent for the Parliament to pass this. But of course what happened is the UK Tory government, a government which the member supports, chose to change the law after this Parliament had voted for that bill in order to try and stymie the intention of this Parliament. That perhaps gave us a hint as to what was to come in terms of prorogation, because Tories of all shapes do not seem willing to consider democracy above all. Now, I don't think the member would want to support that, so perhaps he should read the judgment again, and then he might like to correct the record of what he has actually said this afternoon.
Question 8, Linda Fabiani.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the status of EU nationals who are resident in Scotland.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, ending free movement will significantly reduce the rights that EU citizens in Scotland currently enjoy. The Minister for Europe, Migration and International Development met with the former Immigration Minister Caroline Oakes multiple times this year to discuss the rights of EU citizens in Scotland and to express concerns about the UK Government's EU settlement scheme. He has also raised concerns in writing with the new Home Office Ministers and requested a meeting, and will continue to press the UK Government to properly safeguard the rights of EU citizens in Scotland.
Linda Fabiani.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? And can I presume that the Scottish Government has noted the number of EU nationals who are being refused settled status, with the UK Government trying to justify this by suggesting that pre-settled status is not in fact a refusal? However, that creates great uncertainty and gives people no security whatsoever. Can I ask that at the next meeting with the UK Government, the Minister raises in the strongest terms this issue and denounces this nonsense very, very strongly indeed, because it's causing huge stress to many EU nationals, both in my own constituency of East Kilbride and right across the country. These are people who have lived here for decades and who up until now considered Scotland their home.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I associate myself with much of what Linda Fabiani has said there? And she is right to air this issue. I recognise entirely as a constituency MSP some of the matters that she's described there. And can I say, Presiding Officer, that the stress and the emotional toll that's exacted on our friends and neighbours who've chosen Scotland as their home does not end when they are fortunate enough to be granted settled status. Now, we have a situation where we have examples of our friends and neighbours applying for settled status, getting an acknowledgement and then being left in limbo for months. But, Presiding Officer, I have constituents of my own who have been granted settled status, and the news is conveyed to them by email. That is it. They are now worried that if they leave Scotland on holiday before the 31st of October, they may encounter difficulty gaining re-entry to the country. There is a genuine concern there. They're talking about printing off this email and carrying it with them and asking where they should carry it. So this is a very, very serious matter. We should all be alive to the stress that it's creating for our friends and neighbours. And with regard to the point she makes about Mr McPherson raising this in the strongest personal terms, I will ensure that he's aware of the points that she's made.
Thank you. That concludes questions on government business and constitutional relations. We move on shortly to the next item of business. I'll wait for the front benches to take the places, please.